Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read Team Fast, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called The First Human, written by shoguncdn. The story of humans joining the Galactic Collective began in a rather shameful fashion. The first human was not a captain of a great ship making first contact in space, surrounded by gas giants and fields of stars, nor was it an ambassador flanked by all levels of bureaucrats in a grand assembly with 2 long speeches. Rather, the first human to ever meet the collective was plucked from Earth by members of the Pell race, operating what is known to the humans as a picking operation. As told by the last survivor of the flare, they were told of a then uncharted, backward world in what was understood to be a dead part of space. The information came from a thorn, half out of its mind from being in space by itself far too long. Most scientists would have ignored such a rambling story by someone piloting a craft that looked as if it would barely fly in atmosphere, never mind space. But Captain Shull of the flare was desperate. She had made her living by gathering curios and collectibles for those with the credits to spend on otherwise useless things. Her father was a brood highborn, but such a life was not remotely attractive to his eldest daughter, who preferred the adventure that her nomadic life brought. But even with her father's connections and her wealthy friends, the business was cutthroat and margins slim. So the prospect of a new world with undiscovered creatures that might be of interest to the well-heeled was too tempting to pass up. So, with profit on her mind, Captain Shull took a ship and pushed it far beyond what it was ever intended for. Upon arriving in the system, they made their way to the unremarkable third planet, and with power and supplies running dangerously low, they simply scooped up the first specimen they came across. There was no analysis of the planet or the organisms living on it. They simply had no time, as by then their chances of reaching even the nearest collective outposts were extremely thin. By the standard laws, Captain Shull said it was not illegal. However, not all species in the collective would agree that it should be legal. Humans had not yet developed FTL, the benchmark for civilized sentient species. Humans, of course, still object to this type of classification, but to many of the collective, their view of a species without FTL is similar to how humans view animals known as monkeys. As such, there is no law against taking creatures from such places, even if some may object to the practice. Such species are viewed as primitives. To the credit of the crew of the flare, they managed to get the ship almost back to the outpost. Certainly, it had gone further than anyone could have hoped, but it was not enough, and the decision was made to try and land the ship rather than perish in space as the fuel rods on the ship began to lose their containment. As told by Captain Shull, the ship did not land. It crashed violently into an ocean on Felon 6, a minor planet in an outlying system of the general race. As Captain Shull and her crew began to abandon the ship, she came across the human as it wailed and pounded on the holding enclosure. As you know, the Pal are unable to swim. Their bulbous bodies and lack of lower appendages make it physically impossible for them. So water terrifies them more than anything. From birth, Pal are warned against the dangers of water. It was likely because of that phobia that Captain Shull took pity on the human and opened the enclosure. FTL or not, the thought of letting any creature drown was not something she could bear to live with. As water began rushing through the ship, the captain paddled her way down to an escape pod. The human, panicked and fearful, followed her. When they reached the pod, the captain was surprised that the human had followed her all that way. She had anticipated it would simply run away in fear. The pod was a standard 2-crew affair, but humans are quite a bit larger than the average Pal. As the water rose, however, the captain did her best to communicate to the human that they needed to get inside. Whether from misunderstanding or fear, though, the human stood frozen on the ship's deck, water putting around it. The captain felt she could do no more, however, and turned to the pod alone. At this point, the story becomes unclear, as the captain could only recall the cold, salty water enveloping her. It was then that she felt strong limbs grasping her body and bringing her to the surface. While human strength is well known now, this part of the story was at first dismissed as an embellishment. The human not only swam a distance of some 300 to 400 meters to the shore, It did so while dragging along a full-grown pell. Captain Shull recalled spending the next few days alternating between violent bouts of panic from the near drowning and drifting off into unconsciousness. Her memories of the events were fragmented, seeing the human dragging pieces of the ship from the water, disappearing at times into the forest near the shore, and weeping forlornly in the darkness. When the captain recovered enough to make lucid assessment of her surroundings, she found herself under a canopy made of pieces of wreckage and debris from the ship. The human had not only dragged the pieces from the shore, but had managed to wedge them into the branches of the tree by itself. As this thought dawned on the captain, she related that she felt a different kind of fear. She had no idea that humans possessed that kind of physical strength, and the captain realized that even uninjured, she would be no match for the human should it decide to turn on her for abducting it from its planet. There were also some canisters that contained water and the remains of a fire. The remnants of various fruits and plants were piled further away. The human had managed to address the needs for water, shelter, and food in short order. The captain's injuries consisted of several abrasions to her lower pads, as well as some internal injuries. Her exoskeleton showed some cracks, which would take time to heal. While not fatal, her injuries rendered her unable to do much except sit up and slowly move around. Planet 6 also has slightly higher than standard gravity, which made it even more difficult for the captain. For humans, though, the gravity was only about 70% of Earth's gravity, which coupled with the human physiology made it easier for the human to perform its tasks. When the human came back to the makeshift camp that day, it was carrying a load of wood back that would have crushed any pell. Upon seeing the captain awake and alert, it dropped the wood and ran excitedly over, which caused Captain Shull to recoil in fear. The captain tried to plead for her life, but communication was not possible. As it turns out, however, the human had no intention of harming the captain. Those first few days were frustrating for both parties. Without a common language, it took some time for the two to figure out a system of gestures and simple words to create the beginnings of an understanding. The human found out Captain's name was Shull, and Captain Shull learned the human was female, and her name was Chloe. The captain learned that she had been semi-conscious for some 4 days. In the days and weeks that passed, Chloe and the captain worked together. Chloe took responsibility for the food and water, while the captain searched through the parts Chloe could find to see what she could cobble together to put together a distress beacon. While the pods all contained one, they were not waterproof. As the time passed and the captain could venture further from the camp, she scanned the shore and water for signs of any other survivors, but the rest of the crew had perished in the crash. While the captain did her best to help with the camp, the lion's share of the work was taken up by Chloe. She climbed the trees that contained the fruits and brought back the wood and water. She would start the fires with a piece of scavenged glass. The captain made no effort to hide the fact that it was Chloe who kept them alive all the time through her efforts collecting what meager food and water the area provided. Still, even with her abilities, the rations were Spartan, and life was not easy. The human would often offer Captain Shull the last of the supplies for the day during the most difficult times, but both suffered the effects of too little food and water. Other times, one or the other would get sick eating something that was not compatible with their biology, as they tried to find food based on trial and error. In the evenings, the two castaways would spend time trying to learn more about each other's species. The captain would draw stellar maps in the sand and try to show Chloe where her planet was in relation. Each tried to explain their family structure with simple drawings. The captain learned that Chloe had a mother, a father, and 2 brothers. It was evident the familial bonds of the humans were as strong as any other species. Some evenings, the two would sing each other's songs from their homes, although it is now known that the Pell and humans tend to find each other's music very unappealing. The captain relates that she found comfort in hearing the humans singing to the sky on those nights. Other nights, the captain would awake to find her fellow castaway sitting up with the arms wrapped around her legs, staring at the stars. The captain did not know then how truly difficult it must have been for the human. Approximately 2 months after the crash, Captain Shull managed to craft a distress beacon from the transponder and some batteries found in the debris that had washed up on the shore. It was also at that time that Chloe began to take seriously ill. Her usual energy and vitality were gone. Her body was racked with pains, and her flesh excreted drops of liquid as it desperately tried to cool itself down. The captain did what she could to help ease Chloe's suffering, but her own injuries still hampered her. Not even a human's physical strength can ward off alien bacteria and viruses without proper care. When a Gurnal ship finally picked up the beacon and landed near the camp, the crew reported that they came across Spell Captain and a creature of unknown designation. All attempts to convince the captain to board the Gurnal ship were rebuffed, sometimes violently, as she refused to leave without a companion. The Gurnal captain could not understand why the Pell would insist on bringing along a dead human, but he finally relented and had 3 of his crew bring the body on board and stored it in the refrigeration unit. Captain Pell refused all offers of accommodation and spent the entire trip guarding the entrance to the storage area, afraid the Gurnal would vent the body. Upon arriving at the outpost, Captain Shull used the considerable resources of her father to obtain transport to the nearest Pell system. It was then that she decided the rest of her life to advocate for the humans' inclusion into the collective. She argued that their compassion, strength, and intelligence made them deserving candidates. Taking full advantage of the circumstances of her birth and her contacts, she harassed official after official and filed motions and petitions, often enlisting the aid of influential family and friends. Although it took many years, an envoy was finally dispatched to Earth to initiate an official first contact. At the ceremony, Chloe's remains were also brought back, cryogenically preserved all those years. It was Captain Shaw who presented the body and related the story to the Earth representatives. A massive search was undertaken to find the family of the human, and when they were found, their tears flowed freely upon seeing her form within the cryo unit. Captain Shull told the family what had happened and begged for their forgiveness, even as she braced herself for their hate and anger. But it never came. Instead, the family thanked Captain Shull for bringing her home and asked all the gathered officials and diplomats to honor their request to be left alone to mourn. Captain Shull had hoped to learn more of the life of the brave human, but even forgiveness has its limits, and she never heard from the family again. As the collective and humanity began to share their knowledge, it was the exchange about human biology that took the greatest toll on the captain. The enormity of what she had done became almost too much to bear, and since that time Captain Shull has retreated from public life. Her current whereabouts are known only to her family. So that is the story of how humans joined the collective, where they now prosper and no other species has ever done. And in the spot where the envoy landed on Earth, there is a statue provided as a gift from the Pearl of the human who made it all possible. It shows a young girl sitting with her arms wrapped around her legs, staring at the stars with a very simple inscription. Chloe Young, the first human, June 3rd, 2024 to July 18th, 2035. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.